Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. So guys, I have an urgent warning for you today. So I just got off a Zoom call, a 2.5 hour long call with a former CIA agent, somebody who is fairly high up in terms of the decision-making think tanks and various commissions that influence political thought and government thought within the United States. This person has worked directly for former presidents. They rub shoulders with various statesmen and stateswomen, and as well as directors of the CIA, among other things. Okay, so this individual is very knowledgeable and probably one of the foremost authorities on the topic of nuclear strategy. And the synopsis of our discussion was that the likelihood of a nuclear escalation as a result of the current East versus West tensions was very, very high and even likely. Now, I'm going to break that down. We're going to release that video in a few days, but I want to also share with you some of my thoughts on what is going to happen right now, because if you haven't heard the news, NATO has basically officially now, I say officially because they've unofficially had this stance for a long time, they've officially mobilized around 300,000 troops to be on a state of combat readiness to fight the Russians. Now, why is this so important? Why have we been beating this horse for the last 4 months? This is what the situation is in the world right now. There are approaching, what are we at, 8 billion people right now on the planet. Resource scarcity is a thing. Raw materials, resources, manufacturing, shipping, these are all becoming fewer and farther in between. It's taking more and more energy to extract raw materials, to produce things. Globalism has had some major drawbacks in terms of allowing countries to be self-sufficient and self-reliant with respect to their domestic production. This is causing various problems, various bottlenecks in the supply chain, but it's also a situation that is necessarily going to create conflict over these resources. And we're not just talking about the metals and energies like coal, oil, and these other things, gas, these things that are finite resources. We're also talking about food, water. This is leading to conflict, which is only exacerbated by climate and various contagions that are going around, not only contagions that affect humans, but otherwise, okay? So that is the stage that is set. And as a result of this, we have a major conflict brewing between superpowers. And right now, the state of that conflict is such that the Russians appear to be making some major advances. However, the word on the street is that they may start running low on weapons. I know this is something they were talking about months ago. A lot of people think that this is a nonsensical argument that the Russians will never run out of missiles, because the Russians, as I've talked about many months ago, are one of the primary suppliers of the world, armaments to the world. Okay, they're second only to the United States. So they have a large stockpile of this stuff. However, there's the concern that they may be running out of cruise missiles, out of their longer range missile systems. And because of this recent mobilization of, well, not mobilization, but this heightened state of combat readiness with NATO, because it's looking like the Europeans are digging in, that the Americans and the UK is digging into their position, that they're not willing to make any compromises, and that this war is going to go on. The problem with that is that if Russia is running out of their conventional munitions, they do have a stockpile of 1,000 to 2,000 tactical nuclear warheads, low-yield nukes, EMP weapons that they could potentially use. Now, here is the risk in the coming months. The risk is such that if Russia feels as though they are running low on supplies and they're looking at this stockpile of tactical warheads, there is a distinct possibility that the use of nuclear weapons could be normalized on the battlefield. Low-yield nukes that have little radioactive fallout could be normalized on the battlefield. I know that seems hard to believe. A lot of people suspect, oh, right when the Russians use a nuke, we're immediately going to jump into the fight and it's going to escalate into full-on nuclear Armageddon. Well, this guy, Dr. Peter Vincent Pry, who I was speaking with, has some fairly interesting things to say about the prospect of nuclear exchange leading to nuclear Armageddon. He doesn't think that it necessarily has to entail the destruction of the species. He believes that nuclear war is winnable, and he thinks that the authoritarian regimes such as Russia and China believe that it is winnable and that it's part of their cultural doctrine, if you will, to take that view, that they're willing to sacrifice more people and resources than we are to reach their ends. We've become a very soft society. We're not willing to concede a lot of human life. We're not willing to spill a lot of blood for these various causes. But other countries, unfortunately, are. And the risk now, guys, is that low-yield nuclear warheads in war become normalized. And that we reach this point where we accept that all it takes is the acceptance of one low-yield tactical nuclear weapon. He even talks about neutron munitions launched from artillery or from tanks, okay? And if we become normalized to that, all it takes is one for us to become normalized, then they're going to do it again and again and again, and we're going to find ourselves in a situation where the use of these non-conventional weapons becomes commonplace. And that's when it potentially crosses the threshold into the use of strategic nuclear warheads, which are, of course, the ICBMs, the Iskanders, the what are they called? The Sarmat systems, these longer range, more destructive, high yield nuclear warheads. That's when we start to run into that potential problem. And there's nothing saying, okay, there's a lot of mythos around the use of nuclear warheads. Everybody just takes for granted and presumes that nuclear winter is something which is bound to happen because they don't understand the realities of nuclear war. We broke that down in our first interview. I didn't, but Dr. Peter Vincent Pry talked about what exactly a nuclear exchange would look like and how it could be winnable, especially by the Russians. And there was a lot of pushback on that interview, but what he's saying is sound information. And because he's free to discuss these things, because he has access to, I'm not going to get into the details, but he knows people, okay? And the only reason why they're reaching out to me is because there is definitely a rift within the government, but in terms of their approach to how they're dealing with this situation. While there may be a deep state to some extent, there is varying views on the approach to Russia and China. There is a political divide on how to approach the issue, and he's on one end of that political divide. Right now, we are officially at Defcon 5, but I would beseech you to not put much stock in that. Defcon 5 means we're at the lowest state of nuclear readiness, even though any intellectual who is knowledgeable about these sort of things knows that the actual risk of nuclear war is higher than it's ever been before. And we can see, based on the lies of the last many years, especially with respect to, if it's the Fed talking about inflation, if it's healthcare system, cover-ups, if it's the Biden administration failure in Afghanistan, and not only his administration, obviously that goes way back, but we know that you cannot really take what these people say seriously, that their strategy right now is to just not tell the public if there is a major emergency brewing, okay? Because they don't want to incite a panic. They don't want to incite a panic that they can't control or manipulate. But the fact of the matter is, right now, Europe is facing a major energy crisis of epic proportions. The strategic oil reserve in the United States is at its lowest since 1986. Okay, France, Germany, they're all starting to ration gas. They're all starting to acclimate people to using less gas, using less air conditioning, using less heating, taking shorter showers, things of this nature, because the writing is on the wall. And now the Lithuania situation is unique, and we're going to talk about that in more depth, like I say, in that interview we release later this week. But it's an interesting situation because it appears as though the Baltic states are not very confident about the US and NATO coming to their rescue. And it appears that they're trying to provoke Russia with this Kaliningrad row in terms of the blockade of the exclave of Kaliningrad, which is not part of the contiguous Russian state. They're trying to provoke a response to see how far the U.S. is willing to go in terms of their commitment to enforcing Article 5. Now, we just heard today that there's 300,000 troops that NATO is going to bolster its defenses to that amount, that's going to be the above and beyond that to be the state of combat readiness to protect those Baltic states. The Western states are kind of, you see these pictures of G7, Justin Trudeau and friends. It's like an episode of the show Friends. They're all cheering. It's like a bunch of frat boys having a good old time. And they're not the ones who are suffering immediately. Their people are going to suffer, undoubtedly. They're not going to have to turn the temperature down in their homes. They're not going to have to pay out the yin-yang for gasoline to get here and there. They're not going to be the ones who bear the burden. It's going to be the European people who bear the burden. And in particular, it's going to be the Eastern European people who are going to be on a razor's edge. Because it appears as though Lithuania is going against the advice of the EU, because the EU has said, look, we're not sanctioning, we're not saying that Russia can't get things from Russia. The sanctions apply to countries trading with Russia, not Russia sending stuff to itself. But Lithuania said, no, we're not going to allow stuff through, we're not going to make a corridor for Russia to arm itself, which is understandable, but in many people's eyes, it's an unnecessary provocation. So the question is, why are they doing this, right? Is it because they know that a Russian invasion is perhaps inevitable? Because you need to understand that any peace talks right now, over the weekend, like on Friday, I was starting to have a glimmer of hope, like I usually do every week or so with this situation, because it always appears that, okay, maybe tensions are diffusing a bit. You're starting to hear talks about diplomacy and maybe Kiev walking back some demands and maybe Russia extending, an arm across the aisle or something like that. But then it always invariably ends up as either side was just trying to buy more time to get ready. And that's all that's what the situation is right now. I'm convinced that any positive news or any break in the action is literally just an opportunity that the sides are taking right now to rearm up, because there is no trust anymore. And this is the problem, is that even if we start making diplomatic headways, both sides are using that time to fortify their positions. To, if there is, for example, a peace agreement negotiated between what remains of Ukraine and the newly formed Russian version of Ukraine, all that will be is just buying more time for both sides to rearm for the next big war. And now the risk is that Russia takes all of Ukraine and they're hitting Kharkiv. The plan right now, it looks like they're going to try to take Kharkiv, which is a major city in eastern Ukraine. And that could be a very, very bloody battle. And you're not hearing anything about this on the media, but that could be a major, major escalation. And I mean, everything's an escalation at this point. But if they do take the entire country, the Baltic states are worried that NATO is not going to come to their rescue. There are many scenarios where, through some incremental encroachment, I mean, they're already attacking Lithuania with cyber attacks, okay? So we already, and this was admitted today, that there's this group who has done a denial of service attack on the Lithuanian government. The Russians are claiming responsibility for it. Is it a false flag? Who knows? The fact of the matter is that they're doing this, which is an act of war. I mean, that is an act of war. You're compromising the critical infrastructure of places, and they say that that's going to be next. They're going to target actual critical infrastructure next. That could be going in and causing some sort of problem with the water treatment, with the gas lines, with the power system. So this is a very, very real provocation, and the Russians have responded in turn. And so we're going to see what is the line that gets crossed before Article 5 is actually invoked, and what is the invocation actually going to mean? Is it going to mean that NATO is going to bring the full force of its military to bear against the Russians? Because if that happens, and the Russians are running out of ammo, as they say, which a lot of people don't think they are, I'm sure there's different types of munitions, right? I mean, they may have millions, if not billions of bullets, but, you know, they may be running lower on some missiles. I don't know if that's true or not, to be brutally honest. There's this fog of war right now. But if that is the case, and more countries get involved in this war, then what potentially is going to happen is they're going to be forced to start breaking out some of those lower yield tactical nukes. And then the question is, what line gets crossed that brings the West fully into the war? Dr. Peter Price said something very, very interesting. He said that nearly any country that has some sort of exclave, like a situation like Russia and Kaliningrad, invariably leads to some sort of war. Okay, because especially if that country happens to be behind enemy lines, which it is. So there's a lot of information, other information that I want to share with you guys today. It's stuff you probably are already aware of. Europe is facing a major energy collapse. They're not talking about it. They don't want to talk it up. Boris Johnson has explicitly stated that Russia needs to lose this war. Otherwise, they are going to rely on this nuclear blackmail strategy to continue taking more countries. Is he right? Is he wrong? I don't know, but we know that he seems to have a lot of sway over NATO members, and now they're all, collectively moving in that direction where they're going to bring us into war. We're effectively at war. I mean, we need to call it what it is. And we're sitting pretty over here in North America because we're separated by two major oceans, but invariably this is going to affect us as well. There was a gold ban put on Russia today, which is going to apparently cost them a lot of money. I don't think Russia cares that they can't export gold. I mean, Switzerland's still neutral as far as I know. They're going to continue to import that gold. There's going to be a lot of countries that are going to continue to buy Russian gold. They're one of the biggest exporters of gold in the world. And if you know that we're on the precipice of a possible dollar crash or a major financial crisis, then I don't think they're losing sleep over the fact that they're going to have to hold on to their gold. That's not going to collapse their economy. Now, there was this talk about a default. The Russians have, for the first time, I believe, since the early 20th century, defaulted on their debt. But really, it wasn't a real default, right? It was like, look, we want to pay this, but you're not letting us pay this. It would be like, I don't know, any debtor who is going to want to lend Russia money is going to look at that and be like, okay, it's not like they can't pay it. It's not like they're not trying to pay it. It's just that they're being prevented from paying that. And the other allies that they have see that. So they know that this default is bullshit, and this black mark on their credit rating as a result of this that the Western media is cheering about is just, it's not a true default on a debt in the sense that you couldn't pay it or you didn't want to pay it or you're refusing to pay it. It's not that at all. So it's all like smoke and mirrors right now, right? And I don't really think that that's going to have a major, major impact. All that's going to do, it could potentially backfire like a lot of this stuff has on us, because this is just going to make a lot of more countries less inclined to want to trade with us, to want to utilize the U.S. the U.S. reserve currency system. And it's just going to, dissolve faith in the Western monetary paradigm, because people are going to know, like, you know, look, these guys wanted to pay their debts, so you didn't let them pay their debts, right? I'm not saying that Russia is in the right or anything like that. I'm just saying that that's the reality. It's not that they can't pay the debt. They're just not being allowed to pay the debt. You know, it's like you're trying to go into a, I won't even try to make an example of it. It's not worth the time. Russia is not going to join the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. So we know that the Russians are going to be rolling out the Sarmat systems by the end of the year. It really starts to look like, now they're saying that they want this war wrapped up by winter. I don't see how that happens. I think they're trying to say that they're putting that out there into the ether to try to minimize panic. Because I tell you guys, if I was in Europe right now, I'm not saying I would be panicking, but I would be making hay while the sun is shining, even if it's just barely shining through. Because right now, guys, you need to be preparing for this situation to take its toll on the European economy, to the point where it could amount to, you know, like war rations. Like, we could see again, you know, a situation in which the economic hardship brought on by this war gets so severe that level of rationing gets that bad, where you're actually on the razor's edge of survival. I'm not saying it's going to get to that point, but it doesn't seem to be slowing down. There's no indication that the situation is improving. There's no indication whatsoever that this situation is going to be resolved by winter time. Right now, the energy that's stored, the natural gas that's stored in Europe, is only 55% capacity, meaning that there's going to be major shortages. And even if there's not shortages, like, even if everybody's still able to heat their homes, industry is going to suffer. So the economy is just going to go to hell. So, and they're not going to tell us. That's the thing. That's the new strategy, is just don't tell the population, right? I mean, back in the old days, you know, they tried that in the Cuban Missile Crisis, and everybody went on a panic buying frenzy. So they just stopped doing that. They're not going to tell us when they're at Defcon 2 anymore, which was the highest level it was ever at when the Cuban Missile Crisis was going on. It triggered mass panic, and, you know, everybody freaked out. And if they were to do that today, abruptly, just imagine the panic. This is why right now there's been a slowdown in terms of preparedness, because every time, it's just like the market, you know, anytime there's a slowdown in the markets, people get very fearful, and so they pull back. But just like that Warren Buffett saying, be fearful when people are greedy and greedy when people are fearful. Just like preparedness, you need to, you know, right now when things are relatively quiet, that's when you need to, you know, stock up on stuff. You know, you don't want to do that when everybody is trying to get the same thing that you're getting. So if I was in Europe, I would make sure that you had your respiratory system, or your what you would call it, your respirator, gas mask, what are they called again? Oh geez, I did a whole video on it, and I just got so much stuff in my brain right now. The thyroid blocking radiation pills, potassium iodide. You know, just know where the fallout shelters are. I know it sounds crazy, but you know, things can devolve really quickly. But like I said at the beginning of this video, what I think is going to happen, guys, is I think we may be entering an era where the use of non-conventional weapons becomes normalized. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to escalate to a full-on nuclear war. But I guess we'll see. The fact of the matter is that the Western nuclear capability is not what a lot of people think it is. And we'll save that for the video we're going to release later this week. Now, is there anything else that I should talk about here? Canada's currently has 2 ships in the Baltic Sea. They're going to remain for another 4 months. We're gonna save the rest for later on this week, guys. So let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below, and all I'll say is keep on prepping. No sweating, just prepping. How about that? Not sweating it, I'm just prepping it. Thanks for watching, guys. You stay safe. Canadian Prepper out.